From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are safe, sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in the Yacht Club just as soon as conditions permit. Our speaker today is well-timed in his subject. Beginning as a youngster born in Brooklyn, listening to his grandfather say to him, "You have to be born in Brooklyn to become famous," he started banging around in an old fishing boat at age 12. It was a life raft, which converted into a fishing boat. It had a one-lung engine in it, which he started up by turning a big crank. He learned how to keep it in good shape. He studied radio and television when he was in high school. He enlisted in the Coast Guard Reserve, served in boot camp at Cape May, New Jersey. After that, went off to the Maine Maritime Academy, earned a Bachelor in Science. He worked his way up to second mate in the Merchant Marine and decided to join the Navy. He, after his 7th year, was in early selection for the commander post, became the commanding officer of a destroyer escort. For those who aren't familiar, a destroyer escort's a 306-foot military ship, in this case a World War II military ship. In 1970, he was assigned to the staff of Chief of Naval Operations, assigned to write and then present the daily briefing to the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. And this is a very significant role in that he would distill all the naval intelligence of the day and boil it down to this morning briefing that all of us have heard lots about. Just so you'll know, at 7 o'clock each morning, he would present to the murder board, and a Rear Admiral would eliminate or edit the briefing as he saw fit to prepare it for the final briefing at 8 a.m. every morning. So the journalistic discipline of preparing the daily briefing day after day after day is one that all of us have to be impressed with. In 1973, he was selected to be a commander and command a frigate. In 75, he was selected for the graduate school at the Naval War College, where he earned a Master in Science in International Security Policy. In that class, by the way, his classmate was Colin Powell. 47% of that class became admirals or generals or ambassadors. His thesis was on Italian communism, American dilemma. Later on, that would be put to good use by the Navy as they sent him off to Naples for a couple of years to study what was going on in Italy from a national security perspective. In 1976, he was assigned to the staff of the Assistant Secretary of Defense. And in 1978, he was assigned to the Security and Concepts branch of the Chief of Naval Operations. In 1985, he was promoted to Executive Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Also in 1985, he was selected as Rear Admiral, and in 1992, he retired from naval service, but has continued speaking out publicly on a subject very dear to him and one that's really important to our national security and really our international relations right now. To speak with us today on restoring civility to our public discourse, I'd like to welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon Rear Admiral John Bitoff. John, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thank you, Ron. It is a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In a 2020 issue of the J.P. Morgan Chase widely read annual letter to shareholders, CEO Jamie Dimon wrote, "There should have been a pandemic playbook to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, and the lack of preparation is part of a larger set of problems facing the country. As a nation, we are clearly not equipped for this global pandemic, and the consequences have been devastating." Dimon went on to provide a laundry list of flaws in the U.S., from education to infrastructure, which he argues can be fixed in a nonpartisan manner. We need to acknowledge these problems and the damage they have done if we are ever going to fix them. And went on to say, if there's a silver lining to the current coronavirus crisis, it's forcing us to work together and improving civility and remind us that we live on one planet. We have the resources to emerge from this crisis as a stronger country. Of course, Mr. Dimon's remarks were written long before the country convulsed in demonstrations, rioting, and looting. How much better the outcome would have been if the demonstrators and the police conducted themselves in a manner in which all parties respected the rights of others. I am reminded of the famous quote by the German philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. If you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. I learned that quote more than 50 years ago, and it still resonates within me all these years later. In the 2018 edition of Civility in America, an annual poll conducted by Weber Shandwick and Powell Tate with KRC Research finds that uncivil behavior is on the rise. The cost to the employer of incivility in the workplace can be significant. In addition to turnover, consequences of workplace incivility include loss of job morale, less collaboration, and reduced work quality. The poll also identifies a significant incivility problem that leads to intimidation and threats, violent behavior, cyberbullying, and harassment. 75% of Americans agree that the incivility in America has risen to crisis levels. More than half expect civility in America to worsen over the next few years. Those who predict a more uncivil future fault several parties, but primarily focus their blame on the behavior of politicians, role models, and systemic issues in government. The rise of the internet and social media, the competitive mainstream media, and the 24-hour news cycle. America's youth culture, demonstrators, and protesters. In a recent opinion poll in the New York Times, the author opined, "The internet has undercut our greatest trick, doing good things together." One of the guiding principles of the 2018 San Francisco International Film Festival, which featured a showcase of 183 national and international films that touched on our universal human condition, was to inspire a more civil discourse about the issues that affect us today. Perhaps no film in the festival embodied the ethic of civility more than Won't You Be My Neighbor? An emotion-filled documentary that profiled Fred Rogers, the television personality whose trademarks were his cardigans and messages of kindness to neighbors. A spokesman for the festival said that Fred Rogers is kind of like our mascot for this year's festival, and we would like everyone to behave a little more like him. In the foreword to the book, Treating People Well, The Extraordinary Power of Civility at Work and in Life by former White House Social Secretaries Lee Beerman and Jeremy Bernard, former First Lady Laura Bush stated, "No matter where I have been or whom I have met, treating everyone with kindness and respect is universally appreciated, and we all have the power to brighten the lives of others in big and small ways." In the chapter on humor and charm, the author states that most of our presidents recognize that making fun of themselves is endearing. It shows that you are human and prone to making mistakes like everyone else. And even better, you're secure enough to laugh about them. Jimmy Carter, after leaving office, continued to poke fun at himself. "My esteem in this country has gone up substantially," he said. "It is now very nice when people wave at me, they use all of their fingers." Abraham Lincoln was renowned for his self-deprecating humor and elaborate story spinning. "Were it not for my little jokes," he once said, "I could not bear the burden of this office." I attended a sold-out panel discussion at the Smithsonian on Civility in America. Where did it go? The panelists discussed the changes in society and agreed there has been a gradual decline in civility. We hear more profanity, and we have given ourselves permission to let go of both the physical presentation and the communication skills that tell others they matter. The message isn't just, I don't care, but I don't care about you. One of the panelists, Lizzie Post, a great-great-granddaughter of Emily Post and co-author of Emily Post's Etiquette, 18th edition, who was in her 30s, said, "Where etiquette went to die is on Twitter." We instill values in our children to help them to be more likable and empathetic. Today, they are electronic natives, and this is their form of communication. No privacy and no mistakes. We all have to be aware that once some people have the information, there is no control, and it is indelible forever out there in cyberspace. My daughter says the best thing about being in her 50s is that she did all of her stupid stuff before the advent of the internet. Albert Einstein was prescient when he commented long before the advent of the iPhone and social media. It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. Despite efforts to curb hate speech, eradicate bullying, and extend tolerance, a culture of nastiness has metastasized in which meanness is routinely rewarded, and common decency and civility are brushed aside. Though the internet receives the brunt of censure for corroding manners, other elements of popular culture aren't much more elevated. We have long had game and talent shows, but elimination from them used to be gentler, or in the case of the Gong Show, at least goofier, than being brusquely told, "You're fired. You are the weakest link," or receiving American Idol judge Simon Cowell's withering exit interview critiques. In the dog-eat-dog environments of these programs, cooperation and kindness are readily abandoned for backstabbing and character assassination. As evinced by the long-running Real Housewives series, calm conflict resolution does not make for good ratings. Even cake baking is now a fight to the finish. Last year, the acting Secretary of the Navy flew halfway around the world to address the crew of the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. He publicly insulted Captain Brett Crozier, the departed commanding officer, a highly decorated and respected officer who had already taken a hit for doing what he thought was right for his crew. This unwarranted, rude, uncivil diatribe was in response to a letter the captain wrote that stated sailors were at risk of succumbing to the coronavirus unless the Navy stepped up testing and isolation procedures on Guam. He said, "We do not act now. We are failing to properly take care of our most trusted asset, our sailors." The acting secretary's actions were completely lacking in humility, which is an essential leadership quality and an ingredient of civility. True humility is characterized by the extent to which one's decision-making and behavior are influenced by factors apart and distinct from oneself. True humility is not thinking of yourself less, it is thinking of yourself less. Historians will tell you that people in all times and places have been alarmed by this development. The ancient Romans called it pugna verborum, or the battle of the words. Lou Gehrig, considered by many to be the greatest baseball player to have ever played the game, is a true example of someone in whom humility was an inherent part of his personality. When he was signed by the Yankees in 1923, baseball writers described him as a shy, unassuming mama's boy, despite having what they termed his oak-like physique. In 1927, when Babe Ruth set the home run record, Gehrig had a better year and won the Most Valuable Player award, yet scarcely admitted to having any talent. And the closest he came to bragging was when he referred to his best season as I got going pretty good. In a recently found personal memoir, Gehrig, the son of German immigrants, doesn't call attention to breaking the single season record for runs batted in. And when he describes getting a big hit, he doesn't claim credit, but rather he says, I got a break. An embarrassing lack of civility occurred when a Gold Star family on an American Airlines flight to receive the body of Sergeant John Perry after he was killed in Afghanistan were booed by first-class passengers. The family, consisting of the soldier's father, mother, and sister, were traveling from Sacramento to Philadelphia via Phoenix, and they were in danger of missing a connection when the first flight was delayed. Once the plane landed, the captain asked everyone to remain seated. So, quote, a special military family, end quote, could leave the plane first. That's when the boos and the comments began. Some of the first-class passengers yelled, this is just baloney, and I paid first class for this. You hear the reaction of the first-class cabin booing because their departure from the flight was being slightly delayed, brought some passengers and crew members to tears. Apparently, civility still lives in the hearts of some of us. Henry James, the American-born writer of such works as Daisy Miller and The Turn of the Screw, commented that 3 things in human life are important. The first is to be kind, the second is to be kind, and the third is to be kind. And recently, I observed a quote by Mark Twain on the wall of the waiting room at St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco. Kindness is a language the deaf can hear, and the blind can see. What is civility? What degree of civility is a choice, and what purpose does it serve? The dictionary defines civility as formal politeness and courtesy in behavior or speech. Over the ages, some great thinkers have considered it one of the bulwarks of human society. Civility is more than just politeness, although politeness is a necessary first step. It is about disagreeing without disrespect, seeking common ground as a starting point for dialogue about differences, listening past one's preconceptions, and teaching others to do the same. Civility is the hard work of staying in the presence of those with whom we have deep-rooted and fierce disagreements, and requires that we listen to others with the knowledge of the possibility that they are right and we are wrong. The late Professor P.M. Forney, co-founder of the Johns Hopkins Civility Project, stated that civility is fundamental to the making of a good, successful, and serene life. He said, this has been for me the most exciting discovery of the last several years. Talking about that discovery is both a privilege and a serious responsibility. It is also a bold move. He continues, I wouldn't want to be considered uncivil for presuming to teach civility. The message here is not that I am a flawlessly civil person, but that civility is a wonderfully effective tool to enhance our lives. Marcus Tullius Cicero, Roman statesman, scholar, and writer, voiced the concern that his readers might see a conflict between his lofty teaching and less than perfect conduct. His reply was that he was writing about virtue, not about himself. And when he condemned vices, he first of all condemned his own. Professor Forney went on to say that although I try to practice what I preach, my conduct, like Cicero's, is far from perfect. I remain a flawed messenger bearing a good message. These are my sentiments as well. I attend the Memorial Day and D-Day ceremonies at the National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C., and I see the close relationship between civility, magnanimity, and humility. This beautiful memorial, located on the mall between the Washington Monument and Lincoln Memorial, pays tribute to the generation of Americans, especially the more than 430,000 who made the final sacrifice and who saved the world from tyranny. Nowhere on that monument are the boastful inscriptions by the conqueror, but rather understated quotes by principals involved in the orchestration of this victory. My father was a son of immigrants and a self-made man who never talked about his achievements, which were many. He was very proud of me, and he wanted me to be a good man above all else. He became very emotional at my graduation and commissioning in the Navy, and following the ceremonies, he took me aside and gave me advice which would stay with me well beyond a successful Navy career. He simply stated, "Don't forget where you came from and always take care of your men." Individuals in positions of power and authority have a moral obligation to treat those placed in their care with humility, magnanimity, and civility. Soon after arriving on my first ship, it became readily apparent that the men serving under me often had to accomplish difficult and disagreeable tasks. I followed my father's advice and valued my subordinates and genuinely recognized their hard work and loyalty. I returned their loyalty and was often rewarded when they made me look good. We all desire to be treated as worthwhile human beings, and civil discourse is at the heart of those yearnings. Last year, I gave a keynote speech on leadership at the Rotary Convention, and in researching material for my remarks, I learned that leadership experts in business and academia have discussed and debated the tenets, values, and character of great leaders throughout history, and agree that the best among them possess a handful of values and qualities that are imperative to outstanding leadership. Civility, character, and integrity are at the head of the list that includes the ability to accept criticism, taking care of your people, empathy, humility, and always doing the right things. Leaders who are able to accept criticism thus make better decisions and are better leaders than the ones who do not. Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant, educator, and prolific author, whose writings contributed to the philosophical and practical foundations of the modern corporation, emphasized leadership is not management. Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Leadership is the lifting of a man's vision to higher heights, the raising of a man's performance to a higher standard, the building of a man's personality beyond its normal limitations. I was awakened to the integral relationship between civility, character, kindness, humility, and empathy and understanding, which led me to recall a long ago incident that had a profound effect on me. In my first year as a midshipman, the superintendent would occasionally meet with us and take questions, provide guidance, and often tell an anecdotal story with a moral. One story I have remembered all these years was about a large Navy ship traveling across the North Atlantic just prior to our entry into World War II. A young sailor in his first time at sea was walking along the main deck at night when he heard what he believed were cries for help off the starboard side of the ship. He looked in the direction the cries were coming from, but was unable to observe anyone in the water. The cries for help, which initially were strong, but gradually diminished in volume and became more difficult to hear. The sailor remembered his training, ran up to the ship's bridge and reported what he had heard. The officer deck immediately sounded, "Man overboard, starboard side," and commenced a Williamson turn, which is calculated to bring the ship back to the last known location of the man in the water. And the search began in earnest. After about an hour of searching, the captain called the sailor to the bridge and quietly told him that he did the right thing in reporting what he believed he heard. However, due to the sound of the wind passing through the mast, combined with the sea lapping against the side of the ship, and the ambient noise of the ship's engines and auxiliary machinery, we sometimes hear things that do not exist. The sailor in his late teens looked up at this distinguished-looking gray-haired gentleman with 4 gold stripes on his sleeve and said, "Captain, I distinctly heard someone calling for help, and I heard it at least 5 times." The captain ordered the boat to continue searching for another hour. And just as they were about to end the search, the crew located a man in the water holding on to floating wreckage. He was the sole survivor of a Norwegian ship that had been sunk early in the day, and he had been in the water for hours and could not have lasted much longer. He revealed that he was about to give up when he saw the lights of an oncoming ship and what appeared to be a man on deck looking in his direction. He began calling for help and was buoyed when the ship turned around. When the admiral finished speaking, he looked at us and said, "If you believe you are right, always stick to your guns." The 2 central figures in this story exemplified character in the strongest sense of the word. The captain exhibited empathy, kindness, and understanding, and the young sailor increased his credibility with his civil and steadfast reply. It is a given that Washington, D.C. is inhabited by an inordinate number of people who carry their egos in a moving van, and apparently this is to be expected at the seat of power. I spent a good deal of time serving in rarefied air in our capital, and have been burned by blowtorches in the hands of overbearing, self-important, rude, and uncivil officials. In the fall of 1985, when President Ronald Reagan appointed Admiral William J. Crowe as Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Crowe selected me to be his executive assistant. The chairman is the primary military advisor to the President of the United States. Shortly thereafter, the Admiral asked me to call the White House, as he wished to speak with the President. I pressed the red button on my console labeled White House, and after 1 or 2 rings, a voice answered, "White House operator, may I help you?" I identified myself and indicated Admiral Crowe would like to speak with the President. The operator said, "Just a moment, please," and after a brief interval, she informed me the President was available and asked me to put the Admiral on the line. I subsequently called the White House on several occasions in the same manner without a problem. Sometime later, when Libya's Muammar Gaddafi drew a line in the sand, and we were in the midst of preparing for the Gulf of Sidra operations, the Admiral directed me to call the White House, indicated that he needed to speak to the President on an urgent matter of national security. I immediately pressed a button on my console, and when the operator answered, I repeated the chairman's request. The operator said, "Just a moment, please." Almost instantaneously, I heard a voice on the other end of the line say, "Reagan here." I was flabbergasted, and although the error was with the White House staff, I responded with, "Mr. President, this is Captain John Bitoff, Executive Assistant to the Chairman. Sir, I am mortified, and I apologize for this mix-up. I had no idea you would come on the line first." President Reagan responded in a cheery voice, "Why, there is no need for you to apologize. It is an honor and a pleasure to talk with a Captain United States Navy." How refreshing that the most powerful man in the world would take the time to respond in such a charming and civil manner. But I later learned that this was President Reagan's hallmark. Our first president, George Washington, said, "Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present." Sociologists and other experts in the field of human behavior have expressed their concern and predicted an upsurge in the abuse of spouses and children resulting from living in cramped quarters for long periods of time while suffering various forms of deprivation during the coronavirus pandemic. We must be aware of this dark side of human nature and that it is unacceptable under any circumstances. It is easy for us to become depressed and discouraged during periods of isolation, when we worry about the health and welfare of friends and family, and think about the sadness and the struggles facing all of us. However, I have been encouraged by random acts of kindness during the pandemic. Friends conducting wellness checks, neighbors volunteering to do grocery shopping for the elderly and shut-ins, and telephone calls and emails from friends and associates from the distance past. Yes, civility does live in the hearts of many of us. My final anecdotal story is about Captain Charles Plumb, a naval aviator whose plane was destroyed by a surface-to-air missile during the Vietnam War. He parachuted into enemy hands and was captured and spent 6 years as a POW. Later, when Captain Plumb and his wife were sitting in a restaurant, a man at another table came up and said, "You're Captain Plumb. You flew fighters in Vietnam from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk. You were shot down. How in the world did you know that?" asked Captain Plumb. "I packed your parachute," the man replied. Captain Plumb gasped in surprise and gratitude as the man pumped his hand and said, "I guess it worked." Charlie Plumb responded, "It sure did. If your chute hadn't worked, I wouldn't be here today." He couldn't sleep that night thinking about that man. He wondered what he might have looked like in a sailor's uniform and how many times he might have passed him on the Kitty Hawk. He wondered how many times he might have seen him, not even said, "Good morning, how are you?" He thought of the many hours the sailor spent on a long wooden table in the bowels of the ship, carefully weaving the shrouds and folding the silks of each chute, holding in his hands each time the fate of someone he didn't know. Sometimes in the daily challenges that life gives us, we miss what is really important. We fail to say hello, please, or thank you. Congratulate someone on something wonderful that has happened to them. Give a compliment, or just do something nice for no reason. We need to recognize people who pack our parachute. I hope you will think about and imprint on the examples of civility in my commentary and reminiscences, and that you encourage civility in the St. Francis Yacht Club, in your workplace, and that you teach and practice the merits of civil conduct with your families as well. I leave you with these two quotes on accepting and giving praise as an integral part of civility. William James, a leading philosopher and psychologist in the 19th century, said, "The deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated." And Mark Twain, who said, "I can live 2 months on a good compliment." Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. So now I heard you mention earlier in your talk the Journal of Civility. Did I misunderstand you? Is there such a thing as a Journal of Civility?
The edition of Civility and in America. It's an annual poll conducted by Weber Shandwick and Powell Tate and KRC Research.
Okay. So are there any metrics which support or evidence for the value of civility versus anger or rudeness? We see so much anger and rudeness. Do they have any hard metrics that say when you're courteous and polite, you get results, you win more often?
Yes, and there's a book written by a Stanford professor who claims that the evidence supports the fact that when the level of civility is elevated, that sick leave diminishes, production increases, and people are much happier.
So those of us who have lived through the post-World War II era recognize, and many of us believe, that part of our national security has been the result of a sort of pyramid of alliances that post-World War II Eisenhower and Marshall and Truman put together, where we, America, who only represent 6% of the world's population, are stronger by the support of Germany and Japan and Britain and France and Italy and what's known as the Western Alliance. Many of us believe that bullying our way in the world doesn't really work out as well as inspiring the cooperation of other powers, whether they be secondary powers or just other powers, period. Is there any evidence to support that the big NATO alliance provides more security than the go-it-alone strategies that some have advocated?
Well, I think the biggest set of evidence is the fact that since NATO was established, there has not been a major world war. That's the proof in the pudding.
So, John, you've had some really, really interesting assignments. You prepared the daily briefing for the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. Can you describe during the period that you put those briefings together, kind of what your work cycle was like? What time would you wake up in the morning? What time would you go to sleep at night? And was this a 1 hour briefing? How long was the briefing?
The way it worked is we had four briefers, and we each worked a week at a time. When you weren't briefing, you were assisting in research. I would come in to the office at about sometime or between 8 and 9 p.m. And I would begin reading all the incoming messages and incidents that have occurred. And I would get on the phone to the headquarters in Vietnam and get the latest update on that. And I would begin writing the briefing papers. And I would do that all throughout the night. About 6 o'clock, I would shave and get in my dress uniform, and I would proceed down to the briefing theater. Now, before that, at that same time, a group of technicians would come in and begin putting together slides to support my briefing. And we would be ready at 0700, and I would stand in there, and a rear admiral and his staff would come in, and they would listen to my briefing. And sometimes they would say, "Great, wonderful." Other times they'd say, "No, you're giving too much information on this," or "No, don't say it this way," or "Drop that item." And then by that time would be about 7:30. I would get a cup of coffee and come back in the briefing theater, and then it would be filled up with a sea of gold. And once all the admirals and generals were seated, all of a sudden the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations would come in. Everybody would stand up, and then I would say, "Good morning, Mr. Secretary. Good morning, Admiral. This is what happened in your Navy today." And I would do what we used to call ourselves the Huntley Brinkley of the Navy.
How many items would you cover in a briefing, roughly?
Oh, it would depend. I would say 15, 20 items. Or it could be 10 with one very long item with a lot of graphics showing what happened and where the map and whatever else.
Give us an example of some items that might have been on that list.
Well, one I remember distinctly because I thought it was very exciting. It was not internationally earth-shaking, but a large Navy ship was coming into Norfolk, Virginia, and just as it got to the bridge tunnel, it lost power. This is a large ship, and it's heading toward the bridge. They did everything they could possibly do, and the captain maneuvered into more shallow water and dropped 2 anchors. Stern of the ship swung around, and it missed the bridge by about 100 feet. And I went through this step by step and showing the course of the ship and when it dropped the anchor and so forth. And for me, that was sort of interesting.
So give me a humorous moment. I know this is military, but give me a humorous moment during one of those briefings.
It was very stressful to be a lieutenant commander in front of this sea of gold. And you knew your life was on the line at every. So I didn't find very much funny, to be quite frank with you. I did have a major goof at one point, which it was just, I could never explain it. It just, stress got the better of me. I got up to give the morning briefing on Friday, in which it opened with a screen showing the Pacific Ocean. And it showed all the major units, all the major ships, all around the Pacific Ocean. And I had to memorize this. And I stepped up with a pointer and I pointed to the various, and I pointed to the flagship of the 7th Fleet. And I said, the 7th Fleet flagship is underway. And I said it was heading toward Vietnam. And the vice chief said, "Where is it going in Vietnam?" And I knew exactly where it was going. It was going to what we call I Corps, the northernmost part of North Vietnam, to do naval gunfire support. And I looked at him and I said, "Admiral, I don't know." I mean, it was awful. I mean, I just felt I was. I was reaching over and hit the flusher,
So you knew the answer, but at that moment you couldn't.
I was just overwhelmed. I didn't find it very funny at that time.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us. It's great humility that you can share a goof with us. So now, during this period, we're in Vietnam. America's prestige around the world is going up and down based upon how the public feels about what we're doing in Vietnam. Give me a scary moment, something happening in Vietnam, and there you are giving a briefing to the Secretary of the Navy. Give me a moment where all of a sudden you're worried about what just happened.
I can think of another instance where we were reporting what they call BDA, bomb damage assessment. I had just given a report that the carrier strike had wiped out all these trucks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we've been reporting this day after day.
So these are supply trucks coming from the north down to the south
to support the Viet Cong. Yes,
right. And where we found this trail, we see the trucks, and we're bombing them day after day.
We had night vision, and the Secretary of the Navy said, "Wait a minute. If we have destroyed all these trucks day after day, who is left to drive them?" And that resulted in, this is a good example. Following the briefing, I immediately had to do research and write an answer to the Secretary of the Navy. And the answer I gave was very, very interesting to me. No country in modern history was willing to withstand the amount of damage and destruction that the North Vietnamese were on the receiving end of, except for the Soviet Union in World War II.
So in other words, you said no country had accepted that much incoming, that much damage to their own.
And still keep fighting.
And still keep fighting.
And with the exception of the Soviet Union in World War II.
And who took it from the Germans, who were going north, invading north in the Soviet Union. Yeah. And so, by the way, where did the new drivers and soldiers and people keep coming from? The fields?
They brought women, they brought young children, in a communist society. Ron, you're the driver tonight. I don't know how to drive. You're going to learn tonight.
So, John, who do you admire?
I admire my parents. I am what I am because I had good parents. We didn't have much, but we had lots of love. And my father was an incredible leader and just a good man. And as I told you in my briefing, he gave me advice that has withstood time. He said, "Don't forget where you came from and always take care of your men." And of course, as I said, that includes women today. So I would have to say that I'd have to go back to the fact that I had a very good upbringing. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't, we weren't affluent, but we had good values. And you're talking about later in life, I admire some of the great philosophers, who I mentioned in my talk. I really, as a politician, I genuinely admired Ronald Reagan, and not for his politics, but for the man himself and the fact that he was true to himself. And here's a man who wrote a love letter to his wife every single day in the White House, written by hand, and they're published, and they're absolutely lovely.
Who in current politics do you admire?
I would have to say current. I had one of my great admirers was the late senator from Arizona, John McCain. We were same year group in the Navy. He used to call me classmate. I thought he was a man of great integrity. He made mistakes, he admitted them, but he was. I was so pleased when he came in that dying of glioblastoma and came into the Senate floor and put the thumbs down. I thought that was remarkable. I think another person that I really like is Amy Klobuchar. I just think she is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Character, integrity, stalwart. I'd vote for her for president anytime.
Do you use Facebook or Twitter?
No.
What do you think about military use of Facebook and Twitter? That is to say, official military use.
I don't have an opinion. I really don't. I just I don't follow it. I don't join it because I don't want everybody knowing everything that I have to say or think about, because sometimes I'll make mistakes and I don't want it recorded forever. So it's just something I'm not interested in.
So when you were awarded the doctorate by Golden Gate University, give me some sense. Were your parents alive to see
No.
this happen?
No, and the sad part about it is that my father died young. My father said to me one time, "I hope I live to see you put scrambled eggs on your cap," which means making commander. And at the rank of commander, you have the gold on the brim of your cap. I never knew this until years later, that in my family, my father was known as the Jewish mother, because he always talked about my son, the naval officer, my son, the lieutenant commander, my son, the briefer to the chief of naval operations, like my son, the dentist, my son, the doctor. And I didn't know it. And it really, I think it kind of annoyed my siblings, and because my father was so hard over on it. And I think he lived vicariously through me. So no, he never got to see me make commander. And my wife said, "You wouldn't have been able to hold my father down if he was alive and knew that I made admiral."
That's real sweet. So now recently, the Navy's had some accidents in the North China Sea. About 3 years ago, a couple of ships collided with each other. Can you describe what you could imagine would have happened in the briefing room when somebody in your position was going to brief that one of our ships had literally hit another one of our ships?
I could just see the chief of naval operations jumping out of his seat and saying, "Who the hell is the captain of that ship?" And the incidents that you refer to are very disturbing to me, because I know a little bit about one of them. On one of those incidents, right, all those people on the bridge, you go to special sea detail when you go through the Straits of Messina or the Straits of Malacca, because of the heavy traffic. So you bring all the people up on the bridge, starboard and port lookouts, and people on the radar, and people down in Combat Information Center. With all those people and all the electronics available, an admiral who is knowledgeable told me no one was looking out the window.
So they were all looking electronically, you mean?
They all were glued to all our marvelous electronic stuff. And they weren't doing what seamen learned to do years ago. When I was a captain of a ship, of a destroyer, I made it clear that when you turn to starboard, before you do that, you get out on the starboard wing and you use your eyeballs and make sure it's clear. We don't turn unless we know it's clear. And also, if you had standing orders, if a ship is in a crossing situation, that I would be called to the bridge long before the situation went into extremis, when I could still do something about it. Those are the old rules of seamanship, and I think they lost track of the rules of the road. I had an instructor at the academy who told us, if you ever forget all the details of the international rules of the road, remember this little ditty. If all three lights you see ahead come to starboard and show your red. But if to starboard red should appear, it is your duty to keep clear, to port or starboard, back or stopper, to act as judgment says is proper. Those are the rules of the road.
So how was your time as a merchant marine valuable in your service to the Navy?
I found the merchant marine is so different. You know, the merchant marine, they get on the way, they set the course, you go from here to there. You don't change course very much. You don't change engine speeds. You go from one place to another to bring the cargo. You unload it, and you get out of there as soon as possible and get another cargo. In the Navy, you have to steam around at 25 knots among a whole bunch of ships under different circumstances at nights in total darkness. And you have to know your weapon systems and what systems you would use. And it's a completely different situation. The only similarity is that at both ships, you both should obey the rules of the road. And beyond that, there's not much more.
So of late, you may know that there are new cases of AIS. And for those who don't know, AIS is a modern, sophisticated technology that allows each ship in large yachts to be identified, even racing yachts as small as 45 feet. So it's the equivalent of having your own little license plate. And you can look at the AIS signature and learn what kind of ship it is, where it's from, and what it's doing. There is now recent episodes of AIS spoofing. That is to say, military ships which are sending off signals that they're in the Straits of Hormuz or in some other location near Crimea specifically these days, but they're actually not there. So in other words, it's showing a ghost ship to be in a location where there actually was no ship. And as you may know, these episodes are alarming to the current military because while we all rely upon AIS, we know that the next war is going to be fought on an electronic battlefront before it's fought on a physical battlefront. Before anybody shoots somebody, they're going to lose radio contact and cell phone contact, and in this case, AIS or cell contact. What do you think about the vulnerability of all military because of their current reliance upon incredible modern electronic intelligence?
Well, I'm not really qualified to talk about that, Ron, because I'm past tense. I'm passé. I don't live in that environment, but I would just say that I share the concern you expressed, but I'm not competent to address that. So I would also like to make one other comment about these ships at night. I had an experience once as a commanding officer of a destroyer. They called me to the bridge and they said, "This ship is a giant, one of these giant ships, merchant ships." And kept coming and paid nobody answered the bridge to bridge.
What size of ship?
Oh, I think it was one of these container ships. Maybe 700 feet long, 800 feet long. I don't know. I got out on the wing of the bridge and I looked at my glasses and I watched a man run down the main deck, climb the ladder, and run up on the bridge. It pointed out to me there was no one on the bridge on that merchant ship. And what has happened out there is that these companies, to increase the profit margin, they are cutting these crews down to almost nothing. And and many of them are foreign crews that don't answer to the flag that they're flying on the stern. And you're dealing with a giant ship that has a crew. They have multitasking. Obviously, that officer was sent forward to do something, and he left the bridge, and he left it on Iron Mike. You know what I mean by Iron Mike?
Yeah, auto control, yes. Autopilot. You mean autopilot?
Yes, we called it Iron Mike.
So, were there videos inside the pilot house or the control consoles to show what's going on inside the pilot house of big ships like this?
Now, they may have it today, Ron, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised, but I don't know the answer.
So, John Bitoff, Rear Admiral, U.S. Navy retired. It's been quite a pleasure listening to your comments on restoring civility to public discourse. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. And with that, we'd like to adjourn the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's been a pleasure being your guest.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.